Hi, everybody, and good evening. I'm here to welcome you to the first event of our digital Doing Gender lecture series. And as you probably noticed, when things go digital, they also go problematic and dramatic. So we're trying to solve the problem, and we hope to be able to let our guest be in very soon. And I'm sorry, but I'm also keeping an eye on a chat that I have with Domitila Olivieri and Amira Fred, who are helping me and helping my very limited technological abilities to organize this lecture. And so hopefully Gisela will be able to be here very soon. In the meanwhile, I can just tell you something about the event that you're waiting for. So as I said, this is the first one, the first session of our Doing Gender lecture series for this year. And as you probably know, the Doing Gender lecture series is organized by the NOG, the Netherlands Research School of Gender Studies, and it focuses on the theory and practices of gender in contemporary research. And since the Doing Gender lecture series is meant to promote the new generation of international gender theorists and practitioners, and we decided this year, in line with the spirit of Doing Gender lecture series, to devote the whole series to UU alumni like Gisela, so to scholars who defended their PhD at Utrecht University. So we were a bit nostalgic, and we wanted to welcome them back and to to hear more about what is their research trajectories and their work. So that's the idea. But we are trying to make this idea happening. And I see Gisela. Yes, sorry. So I finally see Gisela on the chat. So if you just give me 1 minute, I will be right back, hopefully with her, to properly introduce her. And yeah, and I guess that we're going to be able to start very soon. So I'll just leave for a second. Hello? Hi, Gisela. So just a second. I think because I don't, well, as you probably imagine, I don't see any of you. So you're there. Hope you're there. But I just see Gisela, thanks God, now, and Amira. Let me properly try to start again the introduction to this first Doing Genders lecture. Now that Gisela is here, so I've just, started to introduce the series and the event, and I just said that this year we're welcoming back UU alumni like you are, Gisela. So now maybe I just say a few words because people are waiting for you to start the lecture, just to introduce you. So in spite of all these technical problems, I'm very happy to chair this lecture by Gisela Carrasco-Miró this evening. And I'm really happy to finally see her again after a long time since our last drinks at Ottoman, at least a couple of years ago, I guess. So Gisela is currently a lecturer at the Open University of Catalonia. And in January 2021, she will be a visiting professor at the Central European University in Vienna. Gisela also a PhD in gender studies from Utrecht University that she completed under the supervision of Rosemary Baukoma and Christine Quinan. And she also holds a master in development economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Gisela has been working for several years as gender advisor and local economic development program specialist for the United Nations in Central America and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And she's also been an independent researcher for many other different international organizations. She has also published on Decolonising knowledges, on politics of development, on feminist theories and feminist and economics. And one of her articles that just came out a few days ago is entitled Decolonizing Feminist Economics, Interrogating the Women's Economic Empowerment and Gender Equality Development Framework, and is among the reading that Gisela suggested to prepare today's session for the students and for everybody. The title of Gisela's lecture today is Decolonizing Development, Putting Life at the Center. Before I leave the floor to Gisela, just a couple of technical remarks. Domi already said it earlier, but you can post your question on the Q&A, and we will keep an eye on it. I will collect questions with Amira and Domitila, and I will reformulate a question to Gisela at the end. I think this is almost it. Yes. So I leave the floor to Gisela. I'm so happy that we made it because I was desperate. I thanks again Domi and Amira for their patience and their support. And yes, please, Gisela, the floor is finally yours.
So thank you very much, Jamila, for this wonderful presentation. And thank you, Domi and Amira, and also Trude for organizing this and for helping me to be technologically here, which is a little bit weird, this kind of things with the screens, because now I cannot see all of you. So I just see Amira, Domi, and Jamila, which it seems a little bit that we're having a beer in a bar or something. So I will try to be a little bit serious with the presentation, but thank you very much for your time to all of you that are listening to your houses, places, bars, or wherever you are. So thank you very much for your time. And so I will start the lecture the way that I prepared it. This lecture, now you will see, I just wrote it. So I wrote it because it came like that for me, and I will try to do it as less boring as possible. So, and then I will be very happy to just all the questions and comments or things that you want to share with me or with all of you. So it will be also fantastic. So at some point I will have to share some pictures. So hopefully technologically will be okay. So, but thank you very much. And again, it's a pleasure to be a little bit, even if it's 2 hours, again, part of the Utrecht University, which is very, very deep in my heart. So, so when I was preparing this lecture, I went for a walk in my neighborhood. So in El Barri de Gracia, here in Barcelona. And in front of my street, there are several graffitis, but there is one that I always pay attention. So during my walk, I stopped and looked again to the graffiti, but decided this time to take a picture and bring it to the lecture. So now this is the graffiti that is in front of my house. And well, let's see, I think I will not be able to share it. Maybe.
Yes, you can. Just press on the share button that you should see at the bottom there.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know.
And then you share, and then you select your file.
I think I cannot see the file. Is it possible? This? Oh my God, I'm sorry.
You see next to the microphone, you should see open share tray.
Yeah.
Click on it. What do you see? Don't you see different options like PDF or Word documents that you have left open? No.
Oh my God. But yeah, I don't know why I cannot. Yeah.
Is the file already open?
The file is already open. Yes. So how can I do it? It's okay. Well, if not, I just can't tell you what it is in the.
If you want to send it to me via email, and I try to see whether I can share it.
Okay, so we want to do that. I'm sorry. So
right.
This technology thing. So I will.
Try to see if you can email me. I'm really sorry, everybody. We did our best to prepare this lecture. I'm afraid it doesn't look like we did, but we really, really tried hard. And
well, I just sent it to you. I don't know.
Gonna try. So
yeah. So well, maybe I can continue, and then when if you receive it, then you can interrupt me. So what I was saying, no? Though, so in my neighborhood there is this graffiti that I always pass through, and when I was thinking about how I want to prepare this lecture, what I really want to talk about, how focus this lecture. So I just looked again to this graffiti that has been there for a while, and the graffiti one, if we can put it later, that is in front of my house. It says "La fragilidad es el alma de la revolución," which in English will be something like "Fragility is the soul of the revolution." So I start thinking from this. So my first thought was that the graffiti seems to challenge two assumptions that are prevalent in popular and theoretical discourses. The first holds that fragility is the opposite of revolution and cannot be conceived as part of that practice. The second supposes that fragility requires and implies the need for protection and strengthening of paternalistic forms of power at the expense of collective forms of social transformation. Feminist scholars, probably most of you know, have already called into question the basic assumptions that fragility and revolution are mutually oppositional. For Judith Butler, what makes us human is precisely what makes us fragile and dependent on other humans. As she explains in her book Precarious Life in 2006, her approach to the problem of human fragility places it in politics, making it a central aspect of democratic life. So here we see the here is the, So here is the,
Sorry, this is not a PowerPoint. You sent me a PDF.
Yes, exactly. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. And then later on at the end, I will tell you that to show the other picture. So this is the graffiti that is in front of my place. Yeah. So thank you, Gisela. I just wanted you to show it, and I'm not very good taking pictures, but you can have an idea. So we were saying, like, that about this idea of calling it, questioning this assumption that fragility and revolution are mutually oppositional. It's been already mentioned and questioned by several feminist theorists like Judith Butler, we were saying, but also at the same time, Paul Preciado, in his text, The Courage of Being Oneself from 2014, published in the French newspaper Libération, has carried a call to be weak and despicable. He says, and I quote, "Because I love you, I want you to be weak and despicable, because it is through fragility that the revolution operates." Butler and Preciado take some ideas from French philosopher Michel Foucault, who had already suggested fragility as an element that shows the external condition that subjugate and the subject and its transformative potential. For Foucault, any diagnosis about the present condition requires an exercise that, and I quote, "It is not about a simple characterization of what we are, but following lines of fragility in the present, of being able to understand why and how what it is could not longer be what it is. In this regard, any description," Foucault says, "must be done according to this kind of virtual fracture that inhales the space of liberty, understood as a space for concrete liberty of possible transformation." End of quote. In that sense, fragility is conceived as part of the very meaning or action of the possibility of social transformation itself. Fragility can be affirmed as an existential condition, since we are all subjects to accidents, illness, and attacks that can expunge our life quite quickly. And it is also socially induced condition, which accounts for the disproportionate exposure to suffering, especially among those broadly called the precariat, for whom access to shelter, food, and medical care is often quite drastically limited. In the light of this, what the graffiti is, for me, suggesting is that there are some common fragilization that has the potential to build up a common. Revolution, as I understand it here, it is not about a single event that will forever change the course of history, like a post-historical wall approach, or a mere seizure of political power, a post-political wall approach. But for me here, revolution is about the collective reappropriation of life. Revolution, therefore, it is for me here about resistance, or as Rosi Bradotti would say, activism, a collective commitment to creating affirmative values. So in thinking together fragility and revolution, therefore, we can move away from ideas of authenticity or get in touch with our feelings or a new moral value as a way of doing politics, since fragility enters into agency and the fragility versus revolution binary has been undone. So we will work through that during now the lecture. So also we know that fragility has been used in problematic ways. For example, when nations advertise their fragility to new immigrants, or when the fragility of white people constructs Black people as threat to their existence. The recourse to fragility in such instances can become the basis for a racist policy that seeks to exclude or contain Black people and minorities. Employing here the work of Butler, these calls to fragility are a form of racist violence and active performance of invulnerability. They are about closure to a certain understanding of our relations with others and with the world, as well as closure to certain features of ourselves, including our fragilities. So the graffiti that we saw has been in the wall here in my neighborhood in Barcelona, in Gracia, has been in the wall for a while. Although often these days we hear, we read and speak a lot about fragility, the graffiti was there before the pandemic. I have to confess to all of you that I have been surprised that many people, including feminists as well as artists, scholars, or the UN Secretariat, that say that the coronavirus pandemic has revealed how fragile everyday life is. And I ask myself, what kind of realities know these people who stated that? Don't they have dependent old people in their families? Don't they live with disabled people or with people with mental problems? Don't they know the highly vulnerable reality of many neighborhoods and territories in our cities? Don't they suffer the impact of cancers and other pathologies from environmental and social factors? Fragility is already there, every day, as an everyday reality for most. So what kept us from seeing fragility? And equally important, what kept us from thinking from fragility? In order to try to bring some light to these questions, I will structure the lecture in two sub-questions. So the first one is, why is now easier, maybe useful, to talk about fragility? The second one is, what happens if we change the perspective and let fragility to interrogate us? So let's go to the first question. Why is now easier, maybe useful, to talk about fragility? Taking up the challenge to think together fragility and revolution posted by the graffiti, I will look at this first question through one of the most dominant political discourses today, that is development. Fragility informs international development engagement in countries deemed fragile. Both security and development come together in talks of fragile states, a level whose origins are widely ascribed to the World Bank. In development circles, development work on fragility responds to increasing concerns about the implications of fragility for stability and development, especially in the context of the Global Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the international promise to leave no one behind. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OCDE, for example, has produced reports on fragility since 2005. The OCDE echoes the World Bank, the United Nations, and other development agencies, and states that fragility is where states, contexts, or groups have weak capacity to carry out basic functions of governing a population and its territory, and lack the ability to develop mutually constructive and reinforcing relations with society. Thus, trust and mutual obligations between the state and its citizens have become weak. This is what the OCDE says in their reports. So the OCDE reports aim to help mobilize aid flows to the so-called fragile states, and it has increased every year since 2014. According to the OCDE, fragility is on the rise, bringing economic, political, and environmental costs to everyone. Although in development circles there is no consensus of what fragility itself means, in 2018, $76 billion in bilateral overseas development assistance went to fragile contexts, more than ever before. This year, the OCDE report, State of Fragility 2020, underlines that, and I quote, "A focus on fragility is now more necessary than ever before. Putting people at the center of the fight against fragility should be the starting point. Fragility undermines our sense of well-being and people's legitimate aspirations for education, health, community, representation, peace, and security in clean and sustainable environments. OECD, governments, and their development agencies need to continue supporting countries and communities in fragile contexts." End of quote. But who has the responsibility to determine when states, groups, and contexts are no longer fragile? Following the OECD report publication in October this year, 3 experts from the Overseas Development Institute, the ODI, it's, for the ones who don't know, the ODI is an influential London-based think tank on international development and humanitarian issues, weighed on whether fragility is a valid concept following COVID-19. In a post called Fragility, Time for a Rethink, the experts celebrate that today the OECD report refers to fragile contexts instead of fragile states and has usefully reconfigured fragility as global and dynamic. They highlight that while the report refers to developing countries, the pandemic has affected the development world too. These experts conclude that fragility goes beyond fragile contexts and development actors should place a much more strong emphasis on opportunity and not just fragility. However, why is fragility something to be defeated, something to be overcome, or even shyly withdrawn into the private sphere? If we take a decolonizing look at the current development discourse, we see the image of fragility is historically associated with the global south. Fragility is associated with the weak, is associated with the soft, with the overdeveloped, with the illegitimate, with the poor, with the irrelevant, with the feminine, with the rooted, with robbed, collapsed, and failed. As the Nigerian political scientist Egosa Oshage argues, fragility in development suggests deviance and aberration from the dominant and supposedly universal but Western paradigm, which played a key role in the development of capitalism. In this framework, resilience has become a protagonist to address fragility by development institutions. The World Bank, for example, initiated a working group on social resilience and climate change, which takes social resilience as a means of fighting poverty, creating opportunities, and overcoming the weakness of fragile states. In conjunction with the United Nations, the World Bank increasingly promotes resilience as the means for growing the wealth of the poor. Maybe here is where resides the leaving no one behind development promise. Resilience, in short, is a powerful idea whose development spans the macro level of ecological and economic systems to the micro level of selves and the complex circuits of power that connect and constitute these different levels of social realities. Feminist scholar Sarah Brake, who I think that also got a PhD at Utrecht University, foregrounds how the development category of resilience is neoliberal and functions as a governmental tactic aimed at managing resistance and concealing destitution. She argues that resilience constitutes a new moral code that works against fragility through gendered notions of subjectivity and agency to produce the idea of a subject willing to cope with conditions of increasing precarization. In doing gender and development, equality and women empowerment are considered the elixir to fight fragility. According to UN Women, development interventions should propel women to the forefront of eradicating poverty and strengthening the resilience of fragile communities and states. Empowering women in fragile settings, UN Women points, need to focus on productive resources, institutional relations, personal resources, and interpersonal relations. In this narrative, we see that equality and women empowerment heralds the promise of a host of development outcomes to remove fragility, better child health, better governance, improved economic outcomes, the holy grail of economic growth. So women from the global south and combating fragility become a means to securing those outcomes instrumentalized to deliver for development and creating clients of privatized services. Here, inequalities and oppression towards women are located in the fragility of the state, but never found in the actual politics of the state-nation, the economy, and development. The reconfiguration of state-civil society relations that is taking place in development's fragile discourse is a view of the state of civil society, of women, and participation as an universal, ahistorical, normative ideal of an appropriate institutional unit for social organization, which is the nation state, portraying it as an autonomous and homogeneous technology of institutions and gender equal to woman, or gender equal to women versus men, and women as an homogeneous monolith. What this discussion seems to ignore is the need to understand the state, civil society, and gender as heterogeneous and mutually constitutive terrains of contestation, as well as the differences, complexities, and heterogeneities of the lives of people in a specific context. This approach calls for a view of governance participation as contingent outcome that negotiates relations in a pre-existing terrain that constrains and facilitates particular kinds of actions. By so doing, desire for a structural change is increasingly constructed as not only irrelevant, but culturally insignificant to the so-called fragile contexts and groups. Once contexts and groups are marked as fragile within the development discourse, those groups and contexts become reified as definitional fragile, fixed in a political position of powerlessness and lack of agency, and designated as in need of protection. All the power then belongs to the state, to the International Development Agency, and their experts that are now supposed to offer them protection and advocacy. Such paternalistic and colonial moves tend to underestimate or actively efface modes of political agency and resistance that emerge within the so-called fragile context. Further, these moves also expand biopolitical forms of regulation and control. When such development strategies abound, development Western interventions and experts posit themselves as not fragile, as self-sufficient, immune, invulnerable, if not impermeable, and without any such need of protection. Therefore, when fragility is understood as something to be defeated, as something to be overcome, characterize a form of thinking that models itself on mastery. In order to counter this untenable framework, the duality fragile and stable has to be understood as politically produced and equally distributed through and by a differential operation of power. Appropriating fragility would then propose a critique to the narrative and reproduction of the frail as a withdrawal towards the individual, the narcissistic, the regressive, the self-sufficient. In that sense, to understand different modes of resistance and social transformation, we have to think what the graffiti claimed, how revolution and fragility work together, something that the paternalistic and colonial development model cannot do, since it is opposed them. Before looking into that, we will need to critically look at the main global development economic model, the green economy, to better understand why it's now more useful to talk about fragility within the politics of development. So, as we saw before, the OECD 2020 report claims that fragility undermines our sense of well-being and people's legitimate aspirations for education, health, community, and sustainable environment. But is fragility what brings human, political, economic, and environmental costs? Is the real problem fragility? In a similar vein than the OECD report, the UN Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, in a recent opinion piece for the New York Times named "A Time to Save the Sick and Rescue the Planet," calls on countries to organize a green economy based in economic growth to recover after the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic has passed. Green economy approaches insist that the future of the planet and people rely upon the market system and the advancement of the new technologies of geoengineering and nuclear renewable energy. But how can the same system that damaged the planet and the majority of people save and rescue the planet and all the people? It has become clear that the now less fashionable green capitalism, now renamed as green economy, that includes development initiatives such as carbon taxes, dematerializing the economy, cap and trade schemes, debt for net swaps, industrial agriculture, market-based green design, hybrid cars, and biogas, has completely failed. With increased devastation to land and water, collapse in our food and agricultural systems, and an uncontrolled growth in greenhouses, green capitalism has only brought us closer to an irreversible eco-catastrophe. Paradoxically, while this ecological destruction and disruption of nature is justified in terms of that economic growth is relevant for feeding people, the problem of hunger has grown. In this economic dimension, development hope for the planet lies in an eco-industrial revolution sparked by technological innovation and directed by the signals of the market as the new magic elixir for continuous growth. Technology can, without doubt, help in some cases to reduce inequalities. But there are already many studies and reports, as the Canadian author and social activist Naomi Klein has argued, that confirms that we cannot trust that technology will maintain the current highly consumptive system in a time of natural resource exhaustion. So, in response to the development statement, fragility brings more human, economic, and environmental costs, I answer. In what extent development's privatization of life, individualization of decisions and perceptions make us more fragile about what we can do? In the light of all of this, and to sum up our first question, I would like to highlight 4 points on how development discourses make it easier and useful to appeal fragility to make political interventions possible. So the first point that we've seen is the false idea of objectivity. As we saw, fragility in development discourse is understood as rational, negative, or even a neutral factor supported by empirical methods and development techniques such as the OCDE fragile framework. This has caused a double erasure, the erasure of certain contexts by classifying them as inferior, so fragile, on the one hand, and the erasure of the work of cultural hegemony, thereby privileging the historical context of Western modernity in different world regions, on the other hand. In that sense, implementing development projects and programs in fragile contexts embodies not only the institutional and financial power of its proponents, the upgrading of living standards, and the modernization of the productive and institutional apparatus, but also the cultural weight and discursive authority of development. Development binary thinking, fragile versus stable, developing versus developed, is accumulative and expansionist about life and has 2 important characteristics. A, ignores and destroys full of other knowledges and forms of possible lives. And B, development discourses are full of ignorance, full of prejudice, stereotypes, and hidden interests. So the second point on how development make useful to appeal fragility to make development interventions possible is that it creates a linear fiction about an unknown and frightful present towards the promise of stability, which is development. So fragility in development is the state that needs to be corrected, removed, or taken advantage of. In this modernist colonial framework, fragility is linked to fear, is either the enemy to be defeated or the resource to be exploited. The third point that we find is experts. Development represents the present as frightful, that can only be understood as something to be evaluated in terms of risk and in need of protection by development experts. Experts are needed, therefore, to fix fragility and bring hope. The fourth point is about adaptability and solutionism. So fascination with apocalypses is, I believe, the dominant narrative of our time and has strongly influenced the development sphere. With the impossibility of imagining possible futures and understanding the future as a scarce commodity, development narratives are trapped in what I think the apocalypse salvation code. So we have the apocalypse dogma, this is our end, it is what it is, sorry, things work like that, and the salvation, no? Which is this techno-utopia where God technology will save us, and we have all of these techno-utopias. So this apocalyptic salvation code creates opportunism through a system of domination that is capitalist, colonialism, patriarchal, where the best response for the client, fragile country, group, or context is the one that better adapts with green responses to the changing fragile conditions of life. So this fascination with apocalypse salvation perpetuates a sense of impotence with powerlessness linked to the impossibility of dealing with and intervening in one's own living conditions. But it is not precisely our attitude of surrender that could actually be taking our species to the age of sustainability. By looking carefully to development green narrative, we can see that this green approach is used to recruit interested investors, much like a bank or an investment company would. Green approaches not only pave the way for privatization of public assets and common pool resources, but also offers entirely new market opportunities. By positioning fragile groups and contexts as resource and the donor as agent capable of bringing the resource to life, the green economy campaign casts development as an extractivist, capitalist, and settled colonialist venture that attacks life. Here, I find the claim from the Brazilian writer, thinker, and indigenous leader Ailton Krenak very relevant. So Krenak says we should be enough courageous to be radically alive and not having to be eternally negotiating our survival. Fragility is a quotidian that the virus has come to intensify, but it is life that dominates the idea and not the other way around. Life is not something abstract. Rather, life is something concrete. It's the life of the planet. It's the life of the people. It's your life. It's my life. It's our life. Human life is not sustained by itself. It needs to be sustained intentionally. So human life is not a certainty, but a possibility. In that sense, when fragility is not the premise of a dilapidated future or in need of salvation, but a space to activate the power of life against the development system that attacks life, I believe that we can elaborate personally and with others life as a common problem. So from this, we're going to go now to the second question. So what happens if we change perspective and let fragility to interrogate us? What happens if we live fragility with more dignity and not with frightening fear? If we change perspectives and let fragility to interrogate us, it gives us an opportunity to stop thinking from a framework that attacks life to reorienting the subjectivities and practice that make life, fragile and finite, a priority. By putting life at the center, we can now ask what are the consequences of our fragilities in a situated manner, and not fragility as a consequence of not achieving a Western modernist paradigm. We can now therefore imagine, we can now think, create, and value ways of deciding about our fragility. So we are no longer powerlessness in front of our lives. Human and ecological fragility set the limits of the intolerable, the limits of dignity, the limits we can recognize and therefore indicate. We can now answer with dignity and not through fear and impotence. This, I believe, is the fundamental critical capacity of decolonizing knowledge. In order to think how social transformation and fragility work together, we need to look at knowledges that challenge the modernist structure that separate humans from other ecologies outside. One of these knowledges and political action that I have been close is communitarian feminism. Julieta Paredes, Aymara feminist lesbian thinker and one of the founders of Mujeres Creando, Women Creating Community in Bolivia, defines communitarian feminism as an action-based way of feminist thinking, political action, and organic movement that moves away from the individualism characteristic of contemporary societies and centers the community and the body in their practice, theory, and in the exploration of transformative power of creativity. Communitarian feminists see themselves and their activities as part of the resistance, as part of demonstrations, uprising, and the construction of the poor, the indigenous, the peasant farmers and workers of Abya Yala. Abya Yala is also known as Latin America, America Latina. Communitarian feminists abjure the notion that feminism has been brought from the north and is a movement of white women in the so-called developed countries. They have overcome the apparent contradiction between difference and equality feminism. So they question both the postmodern fragmentation of the struggles for identity and the isolation of particularity and the patriarchal stage of equality and inclusion. They envisage a new kind of universality, in which sexual, racial, and contextual diversity is recognized with all of its colonial and class connotation and its relations with nature. But their politics involve building recognition, dialogue, and the collective construction of transformation. Communitarian feminism has constructed a new political imaginary and resistance focused on the body, and particularly indigenous women's bodies as the first territory to defend. According to communitarian feminists, the body has become the first frontier, the place from which first individually and later collectively, indigenous people defend what is more secret, life. In that sense, the core reference of equality is no longer the individual bodily subject of rights, but the transformation of society as a whole. They consider that the modernist paradigm of individual rights fails to capture the sense of our fragilities as humans' nature, and corresponds, I would suggest, with an alternative view of the body and resistance to injustice and oppressions. Community feminist proposes a decolonial path of action that brings together fighting strategies against capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. They stress the relationship between women's body and the cosmos and highlights the connection between the commodification of women's bodies and the exploitation of land. The idea here of cosmos and land is not something out there or is something poetic or a metaphor, but a reality perceived by indigenous people in their daily life. In that sense, and bringing UNAC's decolonial scholar Tukan Yang to the conversation, the colonial struggles, as they claim, are neither a metaphor nor a metonym for social justice. Decolonization, therefore, does not mean indigenous. It is about actively recognizing, centering, validating, and honoring non-Western rights, non-modernist values, epistemologies, cosmologies, knowledge, lifestyles, and stories. So, communitarian feminism unifies the fight for the recovery of lands and bodies against the violence perpetrated against indigenous people, and especially against indigenous women. But these bodies, in showing these oppressions, are also resisting the very same powers. They enact a form of resistance, a form of revolution that presupposes fragility of a specific kind and opposes injustice and violence. Lorena Cabnal, Maya Xinca community feminist thinker, ancestral healer, and co-founder of the community territorial feminist movement in Guatemala, defends the body as a place of resistance, a place of enunciation, political action, and the reconfiguration of new ecological alliances. Of course, bodies are not blended into some amorphous social body. But as communitarian feminists argue, if we conceptualize the political meaning of the body without understanding those relations in which it lives and thrives, we fail to make the best possible case for the various political ends feminists seek to achieve. In that sense, it is not just that this or that body is bound up in a network of relations, but that the body, despite its clear boundaries, or perhaps precisely by virtue of these very boundaries, of those fragilities, is defined by the relations that make its own life and action possible. In other words, we cannot understand fragility outside this conception of social and material relations. Based on indigenous experience in expelling mining from their lands and confronting discrimination within their organization and indigenous communities, communitarian feminists have contributed with the cosmogonic and political category of cuerpo territorio, body line, to define a way of positioning and sensing the body as a living and historic territory. The inseparability of struggles for defense of territory and for women's dignity endorses communitarian feminist revolutionary proposal. Far from personifying a romanticized view of indigenous people, today communitarian feminists, thinkers, and ancestral healers are engaged in a lasting political battle to defend life. That is, the right to live and to do it in their own way, from their own worldview and in harmony with the land. This is not to say that social relations in indigenous communities are free from inequalities, but rather to emphasize that putting life at the center, as thinking resistance and fragility together does, is more likely to overweight individualistic calculation and ecocide. By understanding and theorizing the body as maintaining a vital relationship within the network of life, understood complexly as infrastructure, environment, social relations, and networks of support and sustenance by which the human itself proves to be not divided from the animal or from the technical world, communitarian feminists foreground the way in which we are fragile to disappearing nature, infrastructure, economic support, etc. Not only are we then fragile to one another, an invariable feature of social relations, but in addition, this very fragility indicates a broader condition of dependency and interdependency that challenge the dominant development culture organized by sovereign mastery and that resists fragility to support the destructive fantasy of the self-sufficient individual. Fragility can emerge within resistant actions as shown in many current interventions such as the ones in communitarian feminism in Central and South America. Resistance to unjust and violent regimes, therefore, mobilizes fragility as part of its own exercise of power. This gives us another way to think about historical events, action, passion, and fragility in forms of resistance and social transformation. It would seem that, as exposed earlier by the graffiti in my neighborhood, without being able to think about fragility, we cannot think about revolution. And that by thinking about revolution, that is, thinking about the collective reappropriation of life, we are already underway, dismantling the resistance to fragility in order precisely to resist. So I would like now to end with another graffiti. So this is here, I will need Jamila, your technological hands help me. So I would like to end with this graffiti. No? This is the one. It says, "Nunca olvides tu fragilidad. Never forget your fragility," and it's signed by Mujeres Creando in Bolivia, in La Paz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gisela. I'm sorry we're not even able to properly applaud you, but it's, you know, as if we were all really and enthusiastically applauding you, because I think that after our clumsy beginning of the event, your lecture was full of enthusiasm and joy and passion, and we really appreciate that. I'm now gonna have a look at the questions. There are already some questions here in the Q&A chat, and I'm gonna reformulate them for you. I think that, I mean, this is also something that I was thinking about, but I've seen it previously in the Q&A. One of the question is about the use of the very word fragility instead of another concept that is quite relevant and present in feminist literature, which is the concept of vulnerability. So why this emphasis on fragility, and how maybe you distinguish fragility from vulnerability? That was one of the questions. Maybe I try to. Oh, okay. There's also another question on the distinction between vulnerability and fragility, and a question about how do a revolution understood as a collective, how do you envision a revolution understood as a collective reappropriation of life? What does it mean to think of a revolution which is a collective reappropriation of life? Maybe we can start with these two questions, and then if there are other questions, I will collect them and just, you know, reformulate them to you. Thanks, Gisela.
So thank you very much. I'm so sorry that I cannot see the people who make these questions, that are fantastic and great questions, and actually questions that come to me when I was preparing the lecture. So regarding the first question is about fragility. Well, I use the fragility because I literally really started to think about this lecture with the graffiti. And since the graffiti started putting fragility at the center, it is how I start like thinking through fragility. So I went through following the thread through the graffiti, and also because fragility is one of the words that is is used a lot in development. So that's why also I wanted to enter to the development. So they, for example, don't even if they also use vulnerability, fragility, they classify states and people and context through fragility. So I wanted to question this very own narrative that development is using, and it's how that's why I used this the idea of fragility. I would not be sure, like to say like what are the differences of fragility and vulnerability. I know that, for example, Butler talks a lot more about vulnerability, but also Preciado uses fragility, for example, no? So I would not, this I don't know exactly, and sometimes and I have an intuition that is different. They have different perceptions, that is different. Definitely in development, which is the field that I've been more researching and I've been more involved, it's different. So fragility is used as more regarding what we were saying before about fragile states, fragile contexts, and it's usually linked to places in the global south that they call, or developing countries, people from the global south specifically. So that's why I used the fragility. And regarding the second question about how I envision this revolution about collective reappropriation of life, this is also very interesting question. So first, I have to confess also that I'm not very fond of the concept of the idea of the word revolution. I think it's quite a very fascist word that is very used at, a lot, especially here in Europe, and we're seeing a lot of right-wing parties are using revolution constantly. So here I will be also thinking with also Rosie Bradotti, who is also, she's not very fan of this word, and I agree with her, but I understand also revolution, and taking also again like the graffiti to use also how and imagining like the graffiti through a feminist and emancipatory and critical framework. I thought that revolution to be out of these ideas of just mastery, or like these ideas of this utopia that that is very masculinistic at the end. So I thought about this when I think about this idea of collective reappropriation of life. For me, it goes with this idea, which is actually in the title, that is about putting life at the center. And it seems it's not about semantics, about how we play and with words and everything. So when we do, when there are some interventions on political actions and life is at the center, completely the meaning of the intervention changed. And I think that this is revolutionary. For example, in the cases that I've been much more close. If we think about a place like, for example, Guatemala, that I've been working there, or that a Spanish company is going there, like to take the lands, it is actually happening now, of one specific zone. So if we think in putting the market at the center, which is what we have now, in terms of market, it has all the sense, like what we take, and then maybe there will be some people who will have some jobs, and at the end never really is like that. And then we can get like some money, and we put markets at the center, can make sense, all of this taking appropriation of the land and making some money, maximizing benefits and everything. But if we just change and put life at the center, absolutely this action that this Spanish company is doing in Guatemala has absolutely no sense, because it's attacking life. It's attacking the life of the people who is living there. So in terms of sustaining life, has absolutely no sense, this intervention. So we see that the same intervention, if we see it through the eyes of the market, of the green economy, or we see it through the eyes with life, it has two different ethical implications, and consequences in the way of thinking. So I think that this idea of the collective reappropriation of life, but it comes a lot from the ecofeminisms, but also from different communitarian feminists and other feminisms, specifically the colonial feminisms. I think that think life by putting life at the center of when we think about, and also what we were saying about before, that we don't have to negotiate our survival, but radically live our life. So I would say this would be the idea of the revolution. I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So thanks a lot for this first round of answers. There is a okay. There are a few comments, a few more questions. I have a question. Maybe also Domi has a question, and we're gonna go until 6:30. So we still have 15-20 minutes. So the comment to the way I formulate your question was that actually the person was not asking about how you envision such understood revolution, but how to do it. So basically how to do it. But for me, it was pretty much the same in the sense that how to envision that such a revolution is doable, how can be done, what's to be done. Then there was a funny comment about your Freudian slip on Naomi Campbell, Naomi Klein. I don't know how many, well, it was funny enough. I think that another one was the God technology or the techno-utopias. I mean, thinking about this evening and how it went, like we found it quite funny, believing that technology is something not deeply fragile. But so seriously, going back to the question. Okay, so there is one question about the resonances between communitarian feminism and ecofeminism. Are there resonances, or could you say something about possible resonance between communitarian feminism and ecofeminism? And how does communitarian feminism resolve the risk of essentialism? Now I'm really, reading the question, so I don't run the danger of misinterpreting them. Then there is another one. Can you say something about the destruction of communities also in Western context, urban gentrification, for example, and how we can learn to resist without being resilient when we might be deprived of community? So when we might not have a common identity to organize around, apart from that. So the question, once again, is if you could say something about the destruction of communities in Western context and how can we learn to resist without being resilient? Maybe I'll just add something to that question, because I was also wondering about how you use the notion of resilience. You mentioned Sarah Brake, but of course, I mean, there's a way thinking that even if we contest the idea of fixing fragility, the kind of general mainstream development framework that you depicted, then to what extent your resistance rooted in fragility is not another way of naming resilience. I mean, I'm sure that you're not using resilience the way resilience exists from top-down economic model, but I'm wondering, making resistance through fragility is not another way of thinking some kind of resilience. That would be my addition to the question, but sorry for jumping on someone else's question. That's the privilege of the chair. And then that's Jimmy. Okay, sorry. No, sorry. Jimmy's like a ghost haunting us tonight in our chat of the organizer. So two notions, Gisela, that you criticize both in this lecture and in the article that we read for today are modernity and development. And more specifically, you criticize development for being modernist itself, as a modernist project. However, especially in the article, it seems that you move completely away from modernity, whereas you somehow hang on to development. So you drop modernity, but it seems like you stick to development. Jimmy, I dare reframing your question, if you don't mind. For example, you speak about the possibility of decolonizing development, but implicitly you seem to completely reject the possibility of decolonizing modernity. Like modernity cannot be decolonized, but development could be decolonized. So we can still do something with development. That's the question. I mean, is it true? Is it the case? And if it's true, why is this the case? Why development would be more redeemable than modernity? Why would it be possible to decolonize development and impossible to decolonize modernity? And can the struggle to center life be conducted as an alternative project of development? So like this, this struggle that could be centered on life, that should put life at the center, can be, can be seen as an alternative project of development. That's the second question by Jimmy. There's another question, but maybe, I mean, do you want to go with this question? Maybe we try to do a very last round with the one other question that I see in the Q&A, maybe my question, eventually Domi's question. Okay. Shall we do that, Gizzy? Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, so Bob, thank you for the enthusiasm and especially because these I wrote it for this lecture, so it's also a lot of things work in progress. So it really helped me like to think together with all of you. So fantastic. The thing also that also intrigues me more is about the Freudian approach about this Campbell thing that happened. So I don't know if anybody's I don't know why it comes, and even especially because I'm a super fan of Naomi Klein. But I don't know what Campbell came from, but yeah, maybe some Freudian, or maybe the ones who not very fluent sometimes with English, have this. So, but thank you for noticing, like my Freudian. About the idea, so I think it was another about how to do it, also like this idea of revolution. Well, I think that it's important to not fall in one of the 4 points that I was mentioning. It is when I was summarizing like the first question, which is this idea of solutionism. I think that we are sometimes very used to the how to do this, and then this person comes with a list, and then, well, first we do this, we do this. So I don't have the recipe, so of do that, and I think it's quite dangerous to come with and how to do this. So, but what I can say for me, or what I think is that there is people already doing things like that, and I try to present communitarian feminism, which is the one. The ones that I've been close to lately and the last year. So I brought like this as something that is happening, but it doesn't mean that it's happening without, so as an ideal or something perfect. But I think that this is sometimes maybe there is this tendency to see this as, oh, this is the solution. Well, this is, I think that for me, with the communitarian feminism as an example of this bringing together and thinking together fragility and revolution, what it brings is something for me that we can learn from, and we can learn how they are actually doing this combination in a concrete space that they are doing in Bolivia. So for me, it's not about how to do it and bring the list, but it's actually seeing maybe around us who are actually keeping some of these ideas of collective reappropriation of life, And I think that also without romanticizing or not idealizing, but also giving a space to these for groups, peoples, and contexts that has been completely removed, specifically in the development paradigm, I think that brings us some also ideas to keep collaborating and also keep resisting. So yes, I would say this about. So I don't have the recipe, and I think it's dangerous to come with recipe, but I come with this proposal that I'm already doing in Bolivia. And I think that this links me to the question of essentialism. And I think it's a very good question, and it needs to be all the time, like, there is this kind of thing of essentialism always there. And I think that when you the essentialism of communitarian feminism, I think, because it's so concrete and it's very based on, in their case in Bolivia, and also the Bolivia is the one because I brought about Bolivia, but also in Guatemala, it's very concrete about the realities that they are doing that breaks any idea of essentiality. So they are doing concrete actions in their own concrete frameworks and concrete specificity of problems. So they are starting from a problem and they actually doing this. And I think that this breaks this idea of essentialism. So, and I think that also Julieta Paredes that I was mentioning, also like Lorena Capnal has also thought and written a lot about also this idea that sometimes because they are indigenous are already, well, your fight is essentialist. And I think that they had to just write something about that. So I think that it's better if you go to them, to their, where they explain clearly about that. But from my understanding also is this essentialism is broken in the sense when it starts like being concrete and narrated from their own experiences and base of their own realities. And definitely, I think communitarian feminism and ecofeminism has a lot of things in common and other things that are not. And I think that, and I've been in places where they collaborated in things and other places that they are also supported in the distance. So, and I think that, for example, is this idea also sometimes of ecology, and I think that is interesting. It was Miquel Atelier that also thinks about the ecologism of the poor, that sometimes like why we don't say like this indigenous person is an ecologist. So this is coming sometimes, these ideas of ecologism comes from very Western centers sometimes. So, and a lot of the communitarian feminists doesn't define themselves as ecofeminist, and ecofeminist doesn't define themselves as communitarian feminism. But I don't think this is a question of labels. But I think that it's interesting to see how concrete struggles and resistances are happening in the world and how the alliances are happening. So I see more like this kind of union between this ecofeminism and communitarian feminism, and sometimes going apart in concrete realities. So, for example, in my personal case, ecofeminism is very strong here in Spain. So I've been quite involved in specific ecofeminist projects, for example, and they are doing in specific realities, for example, in Spain, but at the same time criticizing companies or things that are happening from Spanish companies or the Spanish government that is happening in Bolivia or in Guatemala, where then they can unite sometimes with communitarian feminisms. So also communitarian feminists has bring like ideas of like territory, land body concepts, etc., that the ecofeminists are also using to understand their own context. And so I think that there is a lot of collaboration in this. So other questions, I don't know if I got all the things, is about the urban settings that it's happening. Yes, I think that, yeah, in this specific lecture, I didn't talk about our urban settings, but definitely it's also happening a lot. So even this idea probably that that I was trying to discuss in the lecture about this fragility and link to the global south, we also can think it also in our neighborhoods, no? Who has the label of fragile in this understanding of somebody who needs to be removed or changed towards a specific ideal, no? So I think that also we can bring also some of these ideas in these, no, in our settings, no, specifically in my case here in Spain, definitely, I think that we can find that, and also in this, at the level of also in the Western countries, and I think that this apocalypse and salvation code that I was briefly suggesting at some point, I think it's very, very much present in our politics and the way that we are dealing with situations in our cities, in our territories, no, and this. This idea of thinking towards like this code of apocalypses and salvation stops us from thinking. So it's not seeing possibilities of any kind of future, and just trying to, you know, remove and, you know, I think it's collapse thinking and imagination, and collapses this idea of future. So yeah, now kind of fast like that, I would say something about these urban settings, but also paying attention also of a lot of things that are also happening in urban settings that are resistant, that are actually revolutionary in this sense of revolution of collective reappropriation of life. We can see also a lot of initiatives and things that people resisting through, even if the idea of fragility is imposed also in their own lives or context, you know? So I was thinking it also is interesting, like to see these dynamics. It's not just sometimes global north and south. And here is important also maybe to remind that when sometimes, even if I was talking specifically about development, we know that global south today, it's not about just a geographical understanding of the north and the south hemisphere, but we can find global south in also this idea of south in also in our neighborhoods and in our cities, no? And the concept of resilience that I'm using specifically here in this lecture, it is yeah, and I use that Sarah Braque, and it's specifically for development. So I didn't really. So for me, what it worked for me in this in presenting resilience is how is matches in the development discourse. So I was more worried about the power of the development discourse and taking resilience as a motto of imposing this green economy, of imposing this idea of fragile as inferior, and neglecting fragility. So I was taking Sarah Braque ideas in that sense of understanding better the development discourse. Then if how resilience can be maybe used in another, the level can change, this maybe will be for another, I'm interested to know more, no? But specifically, I took it because of this lecture and putting in the context of specifically of the World Bank, no? that I think is one of is the big one in the development discourse, which is using resilience and understanding how resilience is used by the World Bank specifically, no? and is imposing some specific programs. About the idea of decolonizing development or decolonizing modernity, well, I think that for me it's what I'm trying to look into is one specific way of understanding development and how modernity relates to that. So it's not that one or either or this or nothing or one or other. So for me is in the article when I say or here also I mentioned in this lecture, Decolonizing Development, I talk about the hegemonic development paradigm that now is governing in the world. So I criticize this approach of development. But then, of course, there is other people, and this is completely respectable and in many sense, and even probably myself at some point, use development in another understanding. So for me, the problem is it's not the word itself, but it's the hegemonic discourses of development, which I am trying to criticize and look very carefully. How the development discourse, not as a word that is used, how the development discourse, the main development discourse is used to abuse power. So I'm using this idea. So if there is more hope for development or not, well, for me, I'm not interested. I mean, in the sense of. I think there is no hope for the way, and I have absolutely no hope about the idea of the development, how it is framed today in terms of as hegemonic discourse. I think absolutely, I think it's a framework that attacks life. So I think that I don't have hope in this. But if there is other ways that is about where life is at the center, and it's called also development. So this is. It could be interesting, no? And as some other people has been also doing. So for me, it's like the idea of this main discourse of development, which is problematic, and is this idea of decolonizing this main discourse and the hegemonic discourse of development. And even for me, personally, I even think that we need to regain ideas of other ways of talking, maybe about social justice, etc., because I think it's very vitiated now. The idea of development, specifically if you work or you go in indigenous communities, the word development already repels, no? So yeah, but because I guess that this idea is linked to this hegemonic discourse of attacking life, and the same happened with modernity. Here I understand modernity has been described by Gisela and others, but is in a unique way that understands a specific way of how society relates to civil society, how civil society relates to state, how states relate to civil society. So modernity refers to one specific way. So the problem is not that there's a specific way, and the problem is when it's the only one that is presented, that is the only one that is imposed, that is the one who is going like trying to impose, and here it is when modernity is a problem. So when it doesn't allow other ways of thinking, other ways of living, and here is when it's the problem, not the idea of modernity itself, right? So or Western or these kind of things. No, I think the problem is when it is unique and it tries to impose, and here is when it's the problem. So it's not about like, let's forget about all the things that happen in Europe and then let's open to, no, I think that it's understanding the power dynamics that are, here. So I would say this in this idea, and I think that about the putting life at the center, development can do that. Well, I think that the current development framework cannot do that, and it's not absolutely doing that, and it's even getting worse and worse every time. So I absolutely have for me, like, I don't like even the word hope, but it's like, I don't think that this is the framework, and I think that this is the framework that attacks life. Another framework that also calls itself as development, but puts the life at the center and everything can be discussed. I think that could be interesting. So, yeah, I would say that. Maybe it means very fast, but I don't know.
Thanks, Gisela. But maybe that was also what was suggested in Jimmy's question about the possibility of thinking the putting life at the center is an alternative way of development. But then, what kind of development? Why do we still limit development? And
with Jimmy, I didn't get it. Jimmy.
But no. Well, I don't know. Maybe I didn't get it either. It's also a weird reading question.
Oh, no.
Okay, there are a few more questions. Actually, we're already running out of time, but I feel sorry and guilty because we started late. So maybe people are there. They want to, hear more from you. So we can maybe go for a very last round of question. I think that I will keep my own question for when we'll meet and have drinks again. But because there are already 3 questions that are formulated there. So one is about your experience with fragility and the COVID pandemic by a student who's saying that they will be a CU student. So the student is also asking, or hoping to see you in January at CU when you will be there, Gisy. So take it as a compliment, let's say. Then another compliment, someone who enjoyed reading your article and learned a lot from it, and is asking how, if you think that embracing feminist economic, decolonizing thinking has made or can make a change in organizations such as the UN, since you've also been working for the UN. What do you think that if you could see positive changes or an impact in the development sector from decolonizing knowledges and decolonizing development framework? Do they have an impact? Does it work? Does it do anything? Does it produce change? And then another question, which is about how to put this work, I guess your work, in conversation with the fight for reparations. So, colonial reparations, slavery reparation. Is there any connection that you could make between, your decolonizing development perspective and also your all discourse on some sort of reclaiming fragility, maybe, and this, the scholarship and the activist claims on reparations. Shall we leave it there? And really, I'll shut my mouth for you to answer and keep my question for next time. And then, maybe you could also try to be brief, but yeah, thanks a lot, GC.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Very, very interesting question. So yes, my experience with fragility, during the COVID, yes, I experienced also fragility. I'm in Spain, which also it's been very high rates of also hysteria, but also a lot of cases. And I live very close to for example, my grandmother, so I had to also bring her like food from the supermarket and all of these kind of things, like to trying to be arranged. So also seeing like loneliness also, specifically for all people. I'm thinking now with my grandma, but maybe could save about other things. But how loneliness, for example, it's and being alone and in a flat with not practically sun and everything. So I think that it's maybe something that make us understand our own fragility and how we need care always, in our lives. About the decolonizing feminist and welcome to see you, the person from the CU also, that I hope to see the person also there. And decolonizing feminist economics in the UN, this is a very deep question. I mean, it is a fantastic question. I have to say that it touched me like something, some fragile point of mine, because yes, I work for UN Women for many years. So sometimes there is something in me, and as a feminist economist, as if you read the article also, and I know that there are more and more feminist economists now in UN, specifically in UN Women, but unfortunately, from my own experience, I'm not seeing this decolonizing, let's say, approach to the UN and this. So I don't know. Again, maybe I will say again, like in this framework of development, I find very difficult, or if not impossible, to keep working towards like justice and against oppressions. So I think that they are very embodied, like the feminist economics that is in the UN, very embodied in this green economic, so green capitalism that we were talking about, and every time it's more and more. So it's still for me a framework that attacks lives and not really in the way of decolonizing and putting life at the center. And the connection with this colonial reparation, I haven't really done much direct work with that. So I think it's also a very interesting question, no? But Yeah, I haven't really done much about this. So been working with several organizations who've been doing colonial reparation in some ways, specifically when I was in Chiapas in Mexico, but not myself being completely involved. But thank you very much. I know you've been very fast, but thank you very much for all these very, very interesting, actually, questions.
No, we actually thank you, Gisela, because after our clumsy and yeah, complicated beginning, I think that your lecture really compensates for that. So it was wonderful. Again, was fascinating, was very brilliant intellectually, but also very enthusiastic. Like I really enjoy everything, the performance, the content, and everything. As I said, I keep my questions, but usually, usually after the lecture we have drinks and we go to Hoffman, and people may also, appreciate how funny Gisela is, besides being a brilliant scholar, and you would not have the chance tonight. So we just can, thank again, once again, Gisela for the lecture. I think that it was a great beginning for this Doing Gender lecture series. I think that this also the question that have been asked, I mean, this battle about words that are not simply words, are also ideals, practices, watchwords to fight for, was super interesting. So, I really think it was a brilliant start for this lecture series. Very promising. We should improve on technology, but that's our task. So maybe I would like to conclude with Gisela smiling to you rather than with my face. So I'll just, mute myself and say thanks once again to everybody. The next time would be in February with a new Doing Gender lecture. We will send you the details about it, and I will just leave the floor to say bye properly, to Gisela. Bye, everybody, and have a good evening.
Well done. So thank you very much, and for all of your time and presence, and for spending like this brief 2 hours, I guess, together. And I just want to end with a graffiti proposal that is never forget your fragility. So take good care of all of you, and thank you very much.